Number 1.
Bonita Karen was last seen in Atlantic City, New Jersey on September 14, 1986. She was last seen strapped in her stroller on the porch of her family's residence in the Virginia Court Apartments in the 900 block of Baltic Avenue. Bonita was eating a popsicle as her siblings played outside at the time. Her mother, Bonita, stated that she checked outside at approximately 7 p.m. that evening and noticed that Bonita Karen had disappeared. She would go on to state that she searched all of Baltic Avenue and surrounding areas for her before reporting her disappearance to authorities at approximately 8:30 p.m. Investigators looked at both of Bonita Karen's parents in her disappearance. Her father, Abdul Salam, was quickly ruled out as a suspect in her disappearance. He had been seeking to gain custody of his daughter and was in prison at the time for robbery. He and Bonita were together for 8 years by the time their daughter vanished. They had 4 children during the relationship and 2 of them were Abdul's, but the pair had actually married. Salam has told investigators that he never believed the events about Bonita's disappearance to be true, and he also doubts she was abducted by someone unknown to her. After Bonita Karen's birth, Bonita attempted to abandon her at the Atlantic City Hospital where she had been born in 1984. She was not charged with any wrongdoing in relation to that incident. In October of 1986, Bonita gave birth to a baby boy. She had checked into the Atlantic City Medical Center under the alias name Laura Smith. She was discharged from the hospital on October 7, 1986, and she left with her newborn son. She reportedly took a cab to an Atlantic City bus terminal, where she caught a bus to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Before getting on the bus, Bonita left her newborn son lying face down in the terminal bathroom. He was found and rescued shortly afterwards. She was arrested and charged with endangering the welfare of a child. She was sentenced to 9 months in prison in January of 1987. Her 3 other children were placed in foster care and sent to a home. She was paroled after serving 5 months, but was sentenced to another 15 months after she was caught shoplifting baby cloths while on parole. The newborn son's father told investigators that Bonita had lied to him and said she had an abortion while she was still pregnant. He was completely unaware that she had carried the baby to term and gave birth until he was contacted by police following her arrest. She would go on to have 3 more sons afterwards. The prosecutor in Bonita's abandonment case has told the court that she has been uncooperative in the investigation into her daughter's 1986 disappearance. She also allegedly lied to investigators about her daughter's disappearance and provided false and unreliable leads about her daughter's whereabouts. She never even asked investigators about the status of the investigation into her daughter's disappearance. They, along with Salam, believe that Bonita is possibly dead. He asked investigators to search the area behind the Virginia Court Apartments for her possible remains. Authorities did use cadaver dogs in the initial investigation and found nothing in that area. In 2009, authorities started to search a wooded area in Pleasantville, New Jersey, for the child's remains. This search occurred because Bonita's best friend went to investigators and stated that Bonita had buried her daughter's body at that location. After a week of searching, nothing was found and investigators called stage search off. It's possible that even if Bonita Karen had been buried at the location specified, her remains might be unrecoverable due to her age and the fact that 23 years had passed since she disappeared. Salam Chaos told investigators the New Jersey's Division of Youth and Family Services was to check on Bonita Karen's well-being and health prior to her disappearance. He had requested them to do so. They did in fact go to the family's residence, but found that no one was at home. By the time they planned another visit, Bonita had disappeared. Abdul continues to search for his long-missing daughter. He believes that her mother knows more about her disappearance than she has told to investigators. Investigators believe that Bonita was not abducted, but rather died on the day she vanished and was buried to conceal her death. Some investigators believe that she may have choked to death on the popsicle stalk she had that day, but there's no evidence to support this. Her mother has never been publicly named a suspect in the child's case. Bonita's disappearance remains open and is considered unsolved. Her case is still listed as a non-family abduction. Her sister held a memorial service for her in 2010. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Atlantic City Prosecutor's Office, Major Crimes Unit 609-645-7700.
Number 2.
Michaela was abducted from Hayward, California on November 19, 1988. During that morning, she and her best friend, Katrina Rodriguez, rode their scooters to the Rainbow Market located on Mission Boulevard. This was approximately 2 blocks away from Michaela's residence at the time. The two girls went to the store to purchase candy and then came back outside to get their scooters and go home. Michaela noticed that one of the scooters was moved in the parking lot and was near a parked vehicle. As Michaela went to retrieve it, an unidentified man came out of the vehicle and grabbed Michaela. He forced her into his car as she screamed. Katrina witnessed the whole thing and ran back into the Rainbow Market to get help. The police were called, but it was too late. The man and Michaela were both gone. The abductor managed to escape with Michaela. Katrina was able to describe Michaela's abductor to police and they created a sketch of him. Michaela's abductor is described as being a Caucasian male with dirty blonde hair which was shoulder length at the time. The man was between 18 and 24 years of age in 1988 and had fox-like eyes. He had a slender build and was wearing a white t-shirt at the time of Michaela's abduction. He also had a distinctive face which was pockmarked and had acne. The man's vehicle was described as being a large older model American sedan. It might have been a 4-door vehicle and was cream, gold, or tan in color. The front bumper of the vehicle was battered and the car seemed run down. The vehicle may have been in a previous car accident. There were possible cement splatters on the side and lights appeared to be set into the rear bumper. The vehicle was last seen speeding south on Mission Boulevard towards Union City. Investigators made a sketch of the man immediately following Michaela's abduction based off Katrina's witness account. The sketch was later revised on December 5, 1988 when an artist, Valerie Stewart, was asked by police to make a more lively-looking sketch of the suspect out of oil painting. She had Katrina with her to help with it. Michaela's abductor was not identified for years after her disappearance. Michaela's mother, Sharon, has been searching for Michaela since her abduction in 1988 and has hoped she is still alive. During the initial investigation, authorities received thousands of leads in her abduction and continue to receive them annually. While her abductor hasn't been identified, there have been multiple suspects named in Michaela's case. Investigators believed Michaela's abduction might have been connected to others that occurred before and after she disappeared in other places of the Bay Area. On June 3, 1988, Amber Jean Swartz Garcia disappeared from the front yard of her residence in Pinole, California. She was never seen or heard from again, and it's speculated she was taken as she played with a jump rope which also disappeared with her. On January 30, 1989, Eileen Beth Misheloff was allegedly kidnapped by unknown individuals as she walked home from school in Dublin, California. She was the oldest of the abducted children. She was 13 years old. Her backpack which she was carrying was later found in an area that had already been searched. This leads investigators to suspect her abductors likely placed it there sometime afterwards. On February 4, 1989, 14-year-old Alicia Christopherson was practicing her color guard routines with a wooden baton in the parking lot of the Cherrywood apartment complex on Dakota Road in Union City, California. She noticed that a man jogged past her twice before he came up behind her and grabbed her in an attempt to abduct her. Alicia used self-defense moves to wrench herself free of the man and ran to her parents' apartment. Alicia had been taught to fight back against anyone who tried to subdue her, so she was well prepared for what the man had done to her. Investigators searched for the man by feet and helicopter, but found no sign of Alicia's assailant. The man was described as being approximately 30 years old in 1989. He stood at 6'3" and weighed between 190 and 200 pounds. The man had shoulder length and curly blonde hair as well as a blonde mustache. The man looked as though he had been in the sun. He was reportedly wearing a green baseball cap, a white long-sleeved sweatshirt with athletics written on it in green lettering. He was also wearing green sweatpants as well as blue and white tennis shoes. Investigators have noted that the man sought in Alicia's case bears a similar description to the man who abducted Michaela just 2 months earlier. The attempted abduction also took place in Union City, California, which is where Michaela's abductor drove towards after taking her. It's unknown if the man who tried taking Alicia had anything to do with the other abductions, but he remains unidentified. On December 27, 1991, Amanda Nicole Eileen Campbell was last seen in Fairfield, California. She was riding her bicycle to a friend's house when she was presumably abducted by a stranger. Her bicycle was later found, but she wasn't. She has never been seen or heard from since 1991. She was 4 years old at the time of her presumed abduction. Several people have emerged as suspects in all of these cases. Timothy Bindner quickly emerged as a possible suspect due to his odd behavior following each abduction. Just 3 days after Amber Swartz Garcia went missing, he went to Amber's house and spoke with her mother, Kim. He told her he was searching the woods nearby for her daughter. Kim recalls Bindner saying, "I wanted to be the one who saved her. I wanted to be the one to bring her home to you." Kim said she wanted nothing to do with Bindner after he said they were looking for a dead body. But he was persistent and continued to offer his assistance in searching for Amber after her presumed abduction. After Michaela was abducted, Bindner showed up to the home of Michaela where he talked with Sharon. He asked her if he could help her find her missing daughter. He said he wanted to go out and look for Michaela, and he even brought a map and showed the locations he wanted to go to. After Amanda Campbell went missing in 1991, Bindner's name once again resurfaced in all the cases. Just months before she was taken, a couple in her neighborhood contacted police and told them that their 12-year-old daughter was receiving odd mail. The mail was written backwards so it could only be read in a mirror. The letter was from Bindner, and it turned out that he was writing to a lot of young girls and often sent them birthday greetings. He told authorities he did this because all the girls seemed lonely. He was questioned by Pinole police after he was seen repeatedly visiting the grave of 5-year-old Angela Jane Bugay in Oakmont Cemetery. Angela was abducted from her apartment complex in Antioch, California. She shared the apartment with her mother and brother at the time of her abduction. A few days later, Angela's remains were found in a shallow grave located in a nearby field. She had been sexually assaulted and suffocated to death. Her murderer was not identified at the time. Bindner repeatedly denied any involvement in all the cases he was linked to and said he had never met any of the missing girls before their abductions. He stated he was deeply affected by all the cases and wanted to try and help in any way he could. However, his constant presence in these cases were not the only noticeable things that popped up in the investigations. Bindner once wrote a letter to law enforcement and speculated that the next child to be abducted would be 9 years old. Soon afterwards, Michaela was abducted from Hayward. On another occasion, Bindner sent a Christmas card to a FBI profiler with an image of a little girl holding up 4 fingers. Shortly after this, Amanda Campbell was abducted at 4 years old. Police bloodhounds also picked up the scent of Amber Swartz Garcia at the grave of Angela Bugay. This was a red flag since Bindner often visited the gravesite. Some agencies say he went to that location up to 90 times a year. Police dogs later traced the scent of Amanda Campbell to Angela's grave. Investigators in the Campbell case questioned Bindner, and he was named a suspect in the missing persons case in 1992. Investigators were considering pressing charges against Bindner for kidnapping, but bloodhound evidence is too unreliable to be presented as evidence in a court or trial. UA Mercury News reporter wanted to interview Bindner about the cases. He accepted her offer but requested to be interviewed at Oakmont Cemetery in the middle of the night. She picked him up at 4:30 a.m. and he asked to play his favorite song on the car radio. The song was Jesus, Here's Another Child to Hold. They drove to the cemetery per the request. The reporter asked him why he was so concerned over the missing girls. He replied that he saw them as his old children. He stated he cried for them, prayed for them, and that he spent a lot of his time thinking about them and dedicated himself to finding them. He then said something that came as shock. Binder was asked what he thought happened to the girls when they were taken. He replied, "Well, you know, one of them was sweet and shy and didn't say a thing, but the other went kicking and screaming. Then, she said," he added, "I'm just guessing that that's what they would have said." The reporter said she got chills. Investigators and the families of the girls believed Bindner was toying with them. He noticeably went out of his way to convince the reporter that he was involved in the abductions of the girls. At the urging of police, Kim Swartz Garcia formed a friendship with Bindner in an effort to learn more about her daughter's disappearance. She agreed that it all seemed like a game to him. She believes he got off on taunting her and her family. At his suggestion, Kim read a book called Crime and Punishment, in which the character who keeps showing up turns out to be the man who committed the crime in question. Bindner has called himself a good Samaritan and said he was simply trying to find the missing girls. In 1989, Bindner was given a reward of heroism by the California Highway Patrol for assisting in the rescue efforts after the earthquake. He maintains his innocence in the cases. He even won a defamation of character lawsuit against Amanda Campbell's hometown for $90,000. Investigators believe Bindner might have also been involved in the presumed abduction of Tara Lassett-Cossey, who went missing from San Pedro, California on June 6, 1979. She left her residence to go but sugar for her mother and never returned. There's no evidence that Bindner is involved in this case, but due to the proximity and location and time period, he is being investigated in the case. Bindner was considered a suspect in Angela Bugay's abduction and murder for over a decade after her death, until authorities uncovered her true killer. In 1995, DNA testing revealed a semen sample found on Angela's body belonged to a 44-year-old man, Larry Graham. He was arrested for Angela's murder and charged in April of 1996. Larry once dated Angela's mother and had a history of sexual offenses against children. He was their neighbor at the time of Angela's murder. In 2003, Larry was convicted of killing Angela and was sentenced to death for the crime. He took his own life in his jail cell in 2009. He is not considered a suspect in the other cases. Investigators at one point believed the cases were connected to another missing California girl. On June 10, 1991, J.C. Lee Dugard left her residence in South Lake Tahoe, California to go and wait at the bus stop for her school bus to pick her up. J.C. was abducted by an unidentified couple who pulled her into a car and sped off. She was 11 years old at the time of her abduction. J.C.'s female abductor was described as being a 32 years old in 1991 who stood at 5'53". The woman had long black hair with a dark complexion. The vehicle that was used in the abduction was described as a late model 1980 gray Ford sedan. J.C.'s abductors remained unidentified for many years after her witnessed abduction. James Anthony DeVeggio has been considered a possible suspect in all the abductions for many years, including J.C.'s. He along with his girlfriend, Michelle Mitch-O, were charged with the abduction, rape, and murder of Vanessa Leigh Swanson in 1997. Swanson's body was discovered just 5 miles away from where J.C. was taken years earlier. Both were previously charged with a few counts of sexual assault in unrelated cases in the mid-1990s. They were both convicted of killing Vanessa in 2002 and were sentenced to death for their crimes. Investigators interviewed them both about J.C.'s disappearance, and Mitch-O claimed she met DeVeggio in 1996, so she couldn't have abducted J.C. However, J.C.'s stepfather Carl Probin, who witnessed her abduction, said that Mitch-O matches the description of the woman who grabbed J.C. There were striking similarities between the two of them. However, federal investigators created a timeline which tracked DeVeggio and Mitch-O's whereabouts over the 1980s and 1990s, and this information deemed it unlikely that they had abducted J.C. On August 26, 2009, J.C. was found alive and safe in Antioch, California. She had been abducted by a sex offender, Philip Garrido, and his wife, Nancy. She was held captive in their backyard for 18 years and was isolated, so she was unaware of the widespread search for her and the two people who took her. J.C. was sexually abused and raped while held captive and gave birth to 2 girls while being held. She and her daughters have since been reunited with J.C.'s mother, Terry Probin. After J.C.'s rescue, investigators noticed similarities between J.C.'s abduction and the abduction of Michaela. They both had similar appearances. Garrido was previously convicted of kidnapping and raping a woman in 1976. He abducted her from South Lake Tahoe, California, and took her to Reno, Nevada. His photo from that time matches the sketch of Michaela's abductor. He had long hair and prominent cheekbones, which bore a striking resemblance to Michaela's abductor. Investigators also located a car on Garrido's property that matches the one that snatched up Michaela years earlier. In 1988, Garrido resided in a halfway house in Oakland, which was a short distance drive away from the store that Michaela was taken from. Investigators searched the Garrido property for evidence and possible links to a string of homicides that occurred in the 1990s. Investigators also looked into the possibility that Garrido abducted Michaela and buried her in his backyard, but found no evidence. He was also looked at in relation to Eileen Misheloff's abduction, and the property was searched. During one of the searches, investigators found a small bone fragment. The bone was tested for any viable DNA evidence, but none was found, and investigators concluded the remains belonged to an ancient Native American burial site. Sharon called the police following J.C.'s recovery and noticed the similarities in the cases as well. Katrina also called Sharon after seeing the searches of Garrido's property and saw an old dirty car that sat on his property. She said it looked just like the one that was used in Michaela's abduction. Investigators questioned Garecht about the other missing girls, but she didn't recall seeing any other children in the Garecht home. Investigators have found no evidence that the Garechs were involved in the other cases. In January of 1993, investigators interviewed a man who was in prison in Indiana. Roger Haggard was serving an 11-year sentence for burglary, escape, and theft charges. He has previously claimed he had information on Michaela's whereabouts in the past, but this time he became more specific with his statements in the case. Haggard was in Hayward from 1988 to 1989 after escaping an Indiana prison. He claimed he met a man named Slam Davidson at a sports bar. He told investigators that after this, Davidson showed Haggard Michaela's body. Haggard said he went to a gladiola field where Davidson buried her body in a shallow grave. Investigators have found no evidence that Haggard's statements are true, and Michaela's body was never found. Investigators aren't even sure if Michaela is dead or alive, but due to passage of time, they suspect she's either deceased or is being held against her will. In 2012, investigators named 2 men as suspects in Michaela's abduction. The 2 men, Lauren Joseph Hartzog and Wesley Howard Shermantine, were known as the Speed Freak Killers, and they went on a killing spree from 1984 up until 1999. They are suspected of killing more than 20 people during the 15 years they killed. They were both charged with killing 35-year-old Howard King and 31-year-old Paul Raymond Kavanaugh. They were both drifters who were shot to death and found in a car on a remote road on Roberts Island. They were found on November 27, 1984. Authorities found tire tracks at the scene of the murders, but initially couldn't identify them. Hartzog was also accused of the murder of 41-year-old Henry Howell of Santa Clara, California. He was found shot to death on Highway 88 near Hope Valley in September of 1984. He was additionally accused of murdering Roberta Armtrout. She was 24 years old when her nude body was found in September of 1985. Roberta had been stabbed a dozen times, and her body was found on the east bank of Potter Creek near Linden, California. In 1999, investigators charged Shermantine with killing 16-year-old Chevelle Vaughn Wheeler. She disappeared from Franklin High School in Stockton, California on October 16, 1985. She was observed getting into a red pickup truck with him. Investigators suspected him of involvement in Chevelle's case for many years, but didn't have enough evidence to file criminal charges, and her body was never found. That all changed in 1999. In 1985, investigators searched Shermantine's family cabin and found hair and blood drops. DNA testing proved they belonged to Chevelle. Shermantine and Hartzog were also charged with killing Cynthia Vanderheiden, who disappeared on November 14, 1998 from Clements, California. She was last seen at a bar with a methamphetamine-fueled Hartzog and Shermantine. Investigators searched Shermantine's vehicle after Cynthia disappeared. They found her blood on the headrest in the trunk of the vehicle. Hartzog said he and Shermantine met Cynthia at a cemetery after the 3 left the bar. While the 3 of them were driving back to Linden, California, Shermantine pulled out a knife and ordered her to perform oral sex. Shermantine then stopped the car near Waverly Road and raped Cynthia before slitting her throat. Investigators also suspect the 2 men might have been involved in other missing persons cases. Ruth Ann Lehman was last seen in Modesto, California on August 19, 1982. She was last seen leaving her residence after telling her legal guardian that she was going to purchase a soft drink. Ruth was acquainted with Hartzog at the time of her presumed abduction. She was 16 when she disappeared. Investigators also believe they might have been involved in the abduction of Susan Robin Bender. She was 15 years old when she disappeared from Modesto, California on April 25, 1986. She was last seen getting into a van outside of a Greyhound bus station. She was never seen again. Investigators are unsure if Bender knew the men before her abduction. Sylvia Lord Stanley was last seen in Modesto, California on June 3, 1986. She was last seen getting into a blue or green truck. She had just been released from the Stanislaus County Women's Facility on a drug charge. She called her family and told them she would get a ride from her boyfriend, who her family did not know at the time. They've also been investigated in the disappearance of Gail Marks. She was 18 years old when she disappeared from Stockton, California on October 18, 1988. She was last seen after leaving the DMV to get an identification card. She called her mother and left a message. Nothing sounded amiss in the message. Investigators have not declared why they think the 2 men were involved in Gail's case. The two men are also suspected of killing Philip Cabot Lloyd Martin. Martin was 47 years old when he disappeared from Stockton, California on September 30, 1993. He failed to pick up his daughters from school that day. He wasn't reported missing until October 11 of the same year. Philip worked with Shermantine and his daughter picked him out of a photo lineup. She believes Philip used drugs with the two men before his disappearance. In 2001, Shermantine was convicted of killing Cynthia Vanderheiden, Javelle Wheeler, Howard King, and Paul Kavanaugh. He was sentenced to death for the four murders and is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison. In 1999, Hartzog was charged with killing Cynthia, Howard, Paul, Henry Howell, and Roberta Ray Armtrout. He was found guilty of killing Cynthia, Paul, and Howard. He was convicted of being an accessory to Howell's murder and was acquitted of Roberta's murder. Hartzog was sentenced to 78 years in prison for his crimes. His sentence was eventually reduced to 14 years after the court ruled at least 3 of his confessions were coerced. He was paroled in 2010. He took his own life in 2012. He did so after he was informed that Shermantine was doing to lead authorities to where some of their victims were buried. In February of 2010, Shermantine wrote a letter to his sister, Barbara, in which he detailed the locations of some of his victims. He stated that the remains were located in an abandoned well on Flood Road near Linden, California. She turned these letters over to the police who followed up on the lead. They interviewed the property owner who said the wells were sealed up before any of the victims went missing. Investigators took no further action regarding the lead. However, in February of 2012, Shermantine drew a map which led to the same well in Linden, California, after he was promised $30,000 for the information. Investigators unsealed the well and searched it. They found over 1,000 human bones in the well which were then sent in for testing and identification. On March 30, 2012, investigators announced that 2 sets of remains were identified. The remains belonged to 2 teenagers who disappeared from Stockton, California in the mid-1980s. Kimberly Ann Billy was 19 years old when she went missing on December 11, 1984. She wasn't a suspected victim until her remains were found in the well. Joanne Hobson was 16 years old when she was abducted on August 29, 1985. Shermantine previously wrote a letter to Hobson's mother and detailed where her daughter's body was buried. Investigators also located the remains of an unidentified African-American female who was pregnant when she died. Fetal remains were found with her remains. Investigators also began to search for 2 possible burial sites in Calaveras County, California in February of 2012, based off information from a letter Shermantine sent in. He indicated sites near a former property owned by his parents. Investigators searched these 2 sites and found the remains of Javelle Wheeler. She was buried on the former property. Investigators located a human skull in a ravine near his former property, which was later identified as belonging to Cynthia Vanderheiden. In 2012, Shermantine confessed to detectives that Lauren Hartzog abducted and killed Michaela back in 1988. Hartzog was living near the R at the time, and he matched the description of the man who abducted Michaela. Shermantine claimed that Michaela's body had been buried on the same property where Kimberly Billy and Joanne Hobson were located. Investigators who analyzed the remains and contents found a human bone fragment that appeared to come from a child in between the ages of 5 and 13. The fragment was tested, but it turned out to not belong to Michaela. Since 2012, there have been multiple allegations that the San Joaquin Sheriff's Office stonewalled the investigation into the speed-free killer case. It's been alleged that they have been uncooperative with other agencies who have cases that might be linked to the killers, and they may have been complicit in destroying evidence related to these cases. In 2010, Shermantine wrote a letter to California State Senator Kathleen Galgiani regarding the locations of addition victims whom were still missing at the time. Kathleen's cousin, Dina McCann, was 19 years old when she disappeared from Stockton, California on December 6, 1981. It's unknown if Shermantine or Hartzog had any involvement in the case. In 2012, Kathleen utilized and sponsored the use of taxpayer funds to search for additional victims of the killers. She also sought to make it possible for incarcerated persons such as Shermantine to help search for victims. Kathleen turned the letter from him over to authorities and alleged that the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office deleted missing persons records that were related to the killers. Joan Shelley filed a lawsuit against the sheriff's office and alleged that they mishandled the remains of the victims found in the Linden well. Joan is the mother of Joanne Hobson. She stated that the sheriff's office ordered the remains be dug up using earth-moving equipment. They did not use archaeological equipment which could have helped collect the remains in a much better fashion. Joan alleged that the equipment used destroyed and crushed the remains in the well. Months after the 2012 excavation, Sheriff Moore's office gave her the remains that were mixed up with other remains. Their negligence with recovering the remains made it impossible for the families of the victims to give them a proper burial. Sue Kaiser has also criticized the way the recovery efforts and the case in general was handled. She's the mother of Gail Marks. Kaiser said she contacted the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office after hearing that they were unearthing remains to see if her daughter might be among those buried in the well. She accused Moore and the police of giving her the cold shoulder on the matter. Sue was quoted saying Sheriff Moore has a dangerous lack of empathy, and the fact that he treated me so disrespectfully was very disturbing and hurtful. She also brought up how a detective investigating Michaela's abduction was treated the same way by the police, and an investigator in Reno, Nevada, who believes a missing person might be victim of the killers, was treated the same way. Sue has stated that the sheriff utilizing the county public works department to excavate the wells was just stupid. She also noted that there were colleges in the area that would have helped the excavation for free. She says filling in the well and then bulldozing over it has likely crushed any other remains that were down there. She believes the sheriff's office has made it impossible for her to know if Gail's remains are down there or not. It's unlikely any other remains are recoverable from the bottom of the well. Multiple other people have accused Sheriff Moore of being the obstacle in solving the remaining cases of the duo's victims. Sharon and the Hayward police have also accused the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office of mishandling the joint investigation into the killer's possible connection to Michaela's abduction. According to a Hayward detective, he was told by a San Joaquin sheriff's deputy that they might have found possible evidence relating to Michaela at the bottom of the well. Among the items recovered from the well was a pair of Mary Jane's shoes. These shoes were similar to the ones that Michaela was wearing at the time of her 1988 abduction. According to Sharon and the detective, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office refused to show them the shoes or even photographs of them. A legal motion was filed regarding this, but it's unknown what came of it. The killers remain strong suspects in the case. Curtis Dean Anderson was named as a possible suspect in Michaela's abduction in the years after it occurred. He is suspected of killing at least 8 children throughout the United States. On December 9, 1999, he abducted 7-year-old Shauna Fairchild from Vallejo, California. She disappeared while walking to catch the school bus. Fairchild's skull was found in the Los Gatos Hills 14 months after her abduction. He was a suspect in her disappearance for some time after he kidnapped an 8-year-old girl from Vallejo, California, while she walked home from school. She managed to escape captivity. He was arrested for kidnapping and killing Shauna in 2004. He was convicted of killing her and was sentenced to over 300 years in prison. In 2009, investigators announced that Curtis confessed to abducting and killing Amber Swartz Garcia in June of 1988. He admitted to the crime before dying in prison on December 9, 2007. Investigators spent 18 months searching for something to corroborate the confession, but found nothing. However, they closed the investigation and ended their search for Amber. Kim Swartz Garcia did not agree with closing the case and petitioned to have it reopened. She believes Curtis Dean's confession to her daughter's murder is false and that Amber might still be alive. Eventually, Pinole police reopened the case and continue to seek answers in her disappearance. Curtis is also a suspect in the 1999 abduction of Carla Rodriguez, who is still missing as of currently. In December of 2020, the Alameda County District Attorney's Office charged 59-year-old David Emery Mish with murder in Michaela's disappearance. He was charged with special circumstances in relation to the case. He has been charged with at least 3 other homicides. In 2018, Mish was charged with the slayings of Jennifer Dewey and Michelle Xavier. Both women were returning from a birthday party when they were raped and killed. Their bodies were found on Mill Creek Road. They were killed on February 2, 1986 in Fremont, California. The pair were both last seen at a 7-Eleven Has Station convenience store by their boyfriends, and they were driving a 1984 Pontiac Sunbird convertible. Both women were found dead approximately 2 hours afterwards. They were both in a secluded area on Mill Creek Road. They were nude and covered in blood, and one of them had been shot to death while the other stabbed. The vehicle they were driving, which belonged to Xavier, was found at the Mission Valley Shopping Center in Fremont. This was several miles away from the 7-Eleven they were last seen at. Their murders remained unsolved for 32 years until a break in the case came. The break came when a cold case detective re-examined evidence in the murder case. Some of this evidence had been processed for DNA in recent years, and the results identified David as being the killer of both women. He lived in the Fremont area in 1986 and was a known commercial burglar and drug user. Investigators do not believe the women had any contact or history with him whatsoever before their deaths. When he was 21 years old, he was arrested of an 18-year-old woman in Oakland, California. She was picking flowers when Mish grabbed her from behind and brandished a knife and said he was going to kill her. He was on parole from the California Youth Authority for charges of rape, assault, and burglary. He was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon in 1982. In 1990, Mish was convicted of the murder of Margaret N. Balls. She was 36 years old when she was found stabbed to death in her house in Hayward, California in December of 1989. He was convicted of second-degree murder in her case and was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison. Mish would have been 27 years old at the time of Michaela's abduction. He has been charged with kidnapping and murder in the case. He was linked to Michaela's abduction and murder through forensic testing. When the abductor moved the scooter that Michaela went to get, he left fingerprints behind. These prints were matched to Mish, which proves he abducted her. He is currently incarcerated at the Santa Rita jail in Alameda County. Michaela's family held out hope for years that she would be found alive. Yearly vigils to mark her abduction were held at the exact spot she was taken from. Multiple television shows have done segments on Michaela's abduction. In 1988, Michaela became the first missing child to be featured on America's Most Wanted, and her abduction was also profiled on Unsolved Mysteries in January of 1989. Michaela's case is considered one of the most high-profile missing children's case in the United States, since she was abducted in broad daylight. Foul play is suspected in her disappearance, and her body has not yet been found. Michaela's family is relieved that the case has finally been solved and hope she'll be recovered. Her abduction gripped the Bay Area for years after she was taken. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Hayward Police Department 510-293-7272. Federal Bureau of Investigation 415-553-7400.
Number 3.
Elizabeth, or more commonly known as Beth, was last seen in Idaho Springs, Colorado on August 16, 1983. She disappeared while she was on her morning jog at 10 a.m. She has never been seen or heard from again. She normally left a note behind for her parents to tell them how long she would be gone for, but she did not do this on the day that she disappeared. Investigators do not believe that Beth left on her own. She left all of her personal belongings, including money she earned from a babysitting job, at her home. Investigators suspect that Beth was kidnapped as she jogged that morning. The last confirmed sighting of her was at a park near her home. Authorities are hoping to locate a man for questioning in Beth's case. He was apparently seen in the park at the same time she was there and might have been seen speaking with her. The man was seen driving in a small red 1975 or 1976 pickup truck with a white camper shell and license plates, not native to the state of Colorado. Elizabeth's sister also told investigators that a man in the same pickup truck had flirted with Beth in the days prior to her abduction. The truck did, however, have blue-black lettering and a brown stripe on the sides. The man was described as being fair-skinned with collar-length light brown hair put off to the side and weighed approximately 175 pounds at the time. This man called himself Claude. He wore prescription eyeglasses with blue-tinted photo-grade lenses. He appeared to be angry after Beth refused to have a conversation with him. Investigators are not sure if he has anything to do with her disappearance, but would like to interview him about the case and identify him. Several people have been named in regards as a suspect in Beth's case in the years following her disappearance. A year following Beth's disappearance, investigators stated they had believed 18-year-old Robert Arnold Storm has been potentially involved in her disappearance. He was being held in the El Paso County Jail at the time he was named. He had shot and killed a 17-year-old coworker, Shauna Webb. She worked with him at a movie theater. He allegedly wrote in graffiti on a wall in Colorado Springs and asked if police wanted to know the location of Beth's body. The location given was near King Soopers. Storm denied that he wrote the message and also said he knew another girl with the same name as Elizabeth. It's unknown if he's still a person of interest in the case. Investigators strongly believe that a man named Edward Apodaca was possibly responsible for Beth's abduction and murder. He was from New Mexico and was murdered by his wife and her mother in 1990. Two witnesses came forward and stated they had seen Apodaca talking to Beth approximately 3 days before she disappeared. They were inside of the red pickup truck with the camper shell. The license plates were New Mexican, and a matching license plate with the numbers was later found on his property. His former girlfriend, Viola Moya, would go on to claim that she assisted Edward in burying Elizabeth's body in the mountains near Idaho Springs. The area she indicated was searched along with cadaver dogs. They did detect the presence of human remains in the area, but none were found during the search. After her statements, Viola was officially listed as a suspect in Beth's disappearance, and investigators believe she knew a lot more about Beth's murder than she had confessed to them. They believe she may have been in the truck with Apodaca and Beth when he assaulted her and killed her. Investigators still consider Apodaca a strong suspect in the case, and her family believes that he was in fact responsible for Beth's murder. He is not the only person who has been investigated for involvement in Beth's disappearance. An Ohio man who remains unidentified has been investigated as a suspect in the case for years. Investigators have not charged him with any wrongdoing in connection to the case. The confessed serial killer from Mississippi once confessed to killing Elizabeth in 1995, but authorities do not consider his story to be credible. It's unclear if he's still considered a suspect in the case. Investigators believe they might have solved the case in 1985 when a woman claiming to be Beth was picked up by police in Tampa, Florida. Her parents flew down to Florida to see if the woman was in fact their long-missing daughter. It turned out, however, that this woman was not Beth but another person. In 1994, investigators stated they may have uncovered possible evidence relating to Beth's disappearance. In the Empire area of Colorado, investigators uncovered several bone fragments, a piece of fabric which may have been from a shirt and similar to canvas, and one single blonde hair. These items of interest were found buried near Interstate 70. The bone fragments remain unidentified, and investigators are not sure if they are human remains. The fabric was too degraded to determine its origin, and the hair was sent to an FBI laboratory for testing. The results have never been released. Some agencies state that Viola led investigators to the site these items would be found in. In 2007, a grand jury investigated her disappearances and sought her killer. They were hoping to possibly indict the responsible party for her kidnapping and murder, but they had no evidence to support a murder charge. As a result, no charges were filed during their investigation, and the task being done by them eventually dissolved. At the time of her disappearance, Beth was a baseball player and was known to jog regularly to stay in shape. She was a babysitter at the time as well. In 1987, her parents both divorced. In 1994, her family decided to have her declared legally dead. Elizabeth's disappearance remains unsolved. Investigators believe she was abducted by a stranger and murdered afterwards. They theorize that her remains are potentially hidden in an Idaho Springs gold mine shaft. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Colorado Bureau of Investigation 303-239-4222.
Number 4.
On a hot, sunny, summer Saturday, 3 young women in bathing suits left all of their belongings at a crowded beach and climbed about a motorboat on Lake Michigan. It was noon on July 2, 1966 at Indiana Dunes State Park, about an hour around the lake from Chicago. A couple whose beach blanket was beside the young women's watched as the motorboat glided away, then waited all day for them to return. They didn't know the girls, but thought it was odd that they would leave their purses unattended on a day when the park was packed with more than 9,000 holiday weekend sunbathers and swimmers. When the couple left at dusk, they pointed out the abandoned blanket to a park ranger. They told him that the young women had left on a boat that was operated by a young man with a head full of dark curly hair. The ranger bundled up the belongings and stored them away. A day and a half later, on July 4, Park Superintendent Bill Svedek took a call from a Chicago man inquiring about his daughter, Patty Blow, 19. She had not been heard from since leaving home for Indiana Dunes with 2 friends Saturday morning. Svedek opened the blanket bundle that had been left on the beach and found Blow's wallet, keys and clothing. He also found clothes and purses belonging to Blow's friends, Renee Brull, 19, and Ann Miller, 21. Miller's 1955 Buick was still sitting in the beach parking lot. Svedek assured Harold Blow that his daughter would turn up. She'd probably just had a little bit too much fun over the holiday weekend. But Patty didn't show up. And neither did her friends. An investigation began belatedly as scuba divers scoured the lake, and searchers on foot and horseback combed the sprawling sands and woods of the park, which stretches along 45 miles of the Indiana coastline. But no sign of the young women was ever found. In fact, they remain missing 48 years later, and their fate remains one of the enduring unsolved mysteries of the region. What happened to the three young women? No one will probably ever know, but it's possible that there are still some clues that might stand out when we trace their movements on the day of their vanishing, and even in the days that came before. On the morning of July 2, Ann Miller drove her four-door Buick and picked up Patty Blow from her family's home in Westchester, Illinois around 8 a.m. Patty told her mother that they planned to return home early in the evening since their friend Renee Brohl was coming with them, and she needed to be back in time to make supper for her husband. Ann and Patty picked up Renee from her home on West Fulton, on Chicago's west side, and then stopped at a drugstore to pick up some suntan lotion. The women arrived at the Indiana Dunes State Park at approximately 10 a.m. Ann parked in the lot, and the women hiked to a spot that was about 100 yards from the Lake Michigan shoreline. The nearby couple stated that the girls left their belongings on the beach at noon, and they entered the water together. The witnesses then saw them speaking to an unidentified man who was operating a 14 to 16-foot-long white boat with a blue interior and outboard motor. They were unsure of the time when this man approached them. The couple described all this to the park ranger around dusk when they noticed that the women's belongings were still sitting on the beach. The women had gotten on the boat, they said, and had headed west with the driver. Ann, Patty and Renee have never been seen again. Renee Brohl left a large beach towel, shorts, blouse, cigarettes, suntan lotion, 25 cents in her purse, which contained about $55 in checks, sitting on the beach. The other women also left clothing, purses and personal items in the sand. Those belongings were collected by the ranger on the night of their disappearance and stored in the park superintendent's office until July 4, when Patty's father called the park, searching for his daughter and her friends. The park rangers soon learned that missing persons reports had been filed for all three women over the weekend in Illinois by their families. The rangers searched the park and located Ann's Buick in the parking lot. Her car keys had been left with her purse on the beach, but other items of clothing and personal effects were still inside of the car. The car was still parked in its original spot from July 2, no one had moved it. The park rangers soon got other law enforcement agencies involved, including the U.S. Coast Guard. The search was in full swing by July 5, 3 days after the girls had vanished. Other witnesses who were in the park that day came forward with conflicting stories, but authorities came to believe that the first witnesses' reports were the most reliable. The three women were seen boarding a boat and they did not return to the beach. The search for the three women continued around the clock. It was extended to a 6-mile stretch of beach west of the state park, near Ogden Dunes, later in the week. More witnesses came forward that substantiated the initial report that the women got into a boat with an unidentified man. Later accounts claimed that he was in his early 20s with a tanned complexion and dark wavy hair. He was wearing a beach jacket at the time. A beachgoer who was taking home movies on July 2 offered his films to investigators. The search was narrowed down to 2 boats after the detectives watched the footage. One of them was a 16-foot runabout with a 3-hull design, which was operated by a man who fit the description of the man seen with the girls. 3 women who matched descriptions of the missing girls were seen aboard the boat in the footage. The second boat was identified as a 26-foot cabin cruiser with 3 men and 3 women aboard. The cabin cruiser was seen at around 3 p.m., 3 hours after the women got aboard the smaller boat. After reports came in that Ann, Patty and Renee were seen walking on the beach and eating after this time, investigators came to believe that they had been dropped off on the beach west of the state park by the driver of the smaller boat while he drove back to retrieve his 2 male friends and the cabin cruiser. While on the second beach, the girls were reportedly approached by another unidentified man who accompanied them to the cabin cruiser. Witnesses stated that this second boat was equipped with a radio telephone antenna, but apparently did not have a name painted on its stern. This final sighting has never been confirmed, but the authorities did consider it reliable. The search went on, but lead after lead went nowhere. A psychic that was brought into the case claimed to have a vision of a Lake Michigan cabin where the women's bodies were buried. An extensive search of the property believed to be the place seen by the psychic did not uncover any evidence. However, detectives did point out that the shifting sand dunes may have buried any possible evidence deeply under the ground. Investigators began looking into the backgrounds of the three women in an attempt to discover if their disappearances could have been voluntary, and it was there that things got ever murkier and stranger. In Renee Brill's purse, the authorities found a letter addressed to her husband, Jeff. The couple had been married for just 15 months in July 1966, but in the letter she asked for a divorce. She said that she felt her husband spent too much time working on cars with his friends and didn't seem to have time for her. Her husband, though, told the police that he was not aware of any problems in their marriage at the time of his wife's disappearance. Her family agreed with the statement, telling investigators that they believed that Renee had written the note in a moment of anger and never gave it to Jeff because she had changed her mind about the divorce. But that might not have been all there was to the story. All three women were friends, drawn together by their love of horses. Patty and Ann met while boarding their horses at the same Illinois stable. Renee was a classmate of Patty's at Proviso West High School in Maywood, Illinois, and she had completed a one-year course in medical technology after graduation. The women often rode together and often met at a tavern in Hodgkins, Illinois after their outings. According to a theory created by Dick Wiley, a reporter and photographer who chased crime in Northwest Indiana for the Gary Post-Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times during the 1950s and 60s, the events leading to their disappearance began there. Both Patty and Ann were single, and Wiley believes that fell for married men they met at the tavern and both got pregnant. Later, statements from some of Ann's friends claim that she was 3 months pregnant in July 1966 and mentioned going to a home for unwed mothers prior to her disappearance. But did she have plans to end the pregnancy? And what about Patty? Was she pregnant as well? Abortion was illegal in Illinois in 1966. According to Dick Wiley, some Chicago women who found themselves in trouble visited a house just across the state border in Gary, where a husband and wife team, Helen and Frank Largo, performed backroom abortions. Wiley has linked the Largos, now dead, to a floating abortion mill that operated on a houseboat offshore in Lake Michigan. He believes Ann and Patty had arranged abortions on that boat on July 2, and they were ferried there by Ralph Largo Jr., a nephew of Helen and Frank Largo. He was seen at the park that day and matched a description of the man last seen with the girls on the beach. Wiley believes that the women got to the larger boat, but something went wrong with one of the procedures, and the other two were killed so that no witnesses would be left behind. The girls had left their belongings on the beach because they expected to be back in 90 minutes, Wiley said. The theory has never been confirmed. The younger Largo died in 2009, but it is plausible. However, unless a body turns up, it's likely to always remain just a theory. And it's not the only one, of course. There have been many unconfirmed sightings of the three women over the years, but no solid leads have ever surfaced. The boats that they were allegedly on in July 1966 have never been located, and the men operating them have never been solidly identified. But people have continued to speculate, especially when it comes to their connection with horses. Ann, Patty, and Renee often rode at the Tricolor stables in Palatine, Illinois, which were owned by George Jane and his brother, Silas Jane, who were involved in fraudulent activities, murders and worse in the mid-1960s. Cheryl Ann Rood, a young woman associated with the horse market, was killed at the Tricolor stables in June 1965 by a car bomb that had been meant for George Jane. George had asked Cheryl to move his Cadillac from the stable entrance and the bomb exploded. Some believe that perhaps Patty, Ann, and Renee, or one or any combination of them, may have witnessed the bomb being planted. However, this does not explain why anyone would have waited an entire year before silencing them. Or does it? In March 1966, Patty received a facial injury that she never explained. One of her friends claimed she made an offhanded remark about it and mentioned trouble with syndicate people. But no proof of any trouble exists. There was a connection between the Janes and the missing women, though. Both men's telephone numbers were found in their belongings after their disappearance. There is no question that the two men were deeply involved in crime. George was shot to death in 1970 and Silas was later convicted of conspiracy in his brother's murder and sent to prison. He died in 1987. He is also a suspect in the disappearance and probably murder of Candy heiress Helen Brach. See my blog about this unsolved case by following this link. In 1997, a man named James Blotio was charged with planting the 1965 car bomb that killed Cheryl Ann Rood at the Janes stables, but neither he nor the Janes have been positively linked to the disappearances of Ann, Patty, and Renee. It's hard not to speculate, though, that any of them might have been involved in some way. Silas Jane reportedly told a sheriff that he had 3 bodies buried beneath his residence after the 1966 disappearances. Investigators took his claims seriously and planned to search the property, but the sheriff involved was killed in a farming accident before the search took place. For whatever reason, it was not pursued after that, leading some to wonder if the claim was true. What happened to 3 pretty young women in July 1966? We likely never know. The case is not unsolvable, but without any bodies or any solid new leads, it's unlikely that the truth will ever be known.
Number 5.
Jessica was abducted from Lexington, South Carolina on June 5, 1986. On the day of her disappearance, Jessica and her family worked in yard of their mobile home, which was located between Red Bank and Pelion. The family went inside and had lettuce, tomato, and bacon sandwiches for dinner. Her mother, Deborah, described the events that day as being normal and recalled nothing out of the ordinary happening. Deborah painted Jessica's nails that night and she requested to sleep with her mother. Jessica had slept in her mother's bed the night before. However, Jessica's older brother had an ear infection, so he would be sleeping in their mother's bed that night. Between 11:30 p.m. and 12 a.m., Jessie crawled into the double bed she shared with her 6-year-old sister, Rebecca. She fell asleep afterwards. At some point between the time Jessica fell asleep and 9 a.m., an unknown intruder broke into the mobile home. Rebecca woke up and saw a man standing over the bed she and Jessica were sleeping in. He bent over and lifted Jessica out of the bed and took her out of the bedroom. Rebecca said he managed to do this without waking up Jessica and he had her slumped over his shoulder. The individual left the house through the front door. Deborah woke up the next morning to Rebecca calling out and requesting cereal for breakfast. However, a chaotic scene awaited Deborah throughout the house. In the children's bedroom, the floor was littered with what appeared to be school papers. The front door was also opened, and the family dog was inside the home wandering about. There was evidence of a home break-in. The curtains in the living room window were ripped, and the screen had been taken out. It is believed this is where the abductor entered. Deborah frantically searched all around the home, and even underneath it for Jessica, but couldn't find her. She then questioned Rebecca about what happened. Rebecca told her mother she's gone. The man with the magic hat and the beard took her last night. She was frantic and didn't understand why Rebecca didn't call out when her sister was being taken. Rebecca later recounted that she was paralyzed with fear and couldn't remember falling asleep again after that. Deborah immediately reported her daughter's disappearance. She was questioned about her daughter's whereabouts and recalled how she had kicked her boyfriend out of the house just days before Jessica went missing. She said her reasons for kicking him out were what she described as possessive behavior and alcohol use. After she was interviewed by authorities, Deborah called her boyfriend and accused him of taking her daughter. She demanded to know where she was, but he claimed he didn't know where Jessica was and appeared surprised by the call. He was questioned various times by investigators, but he maintained his innocence in the case. Jessica's family felt close friends might have abducted her, but no one was named as a suspect in her disappearance, and her abductor wasn't identified at the time. Investigators came up with little to no trace of Jessica, and she was never seen again. Investigators at one point suspected that Jessica's father, David Romero Gutierrez Ruiz, was possibly behind her disappearance. David and Deborah divorced in 1983 when Jessica was 2 years old. He was reportedly living in Mexico City, Mexico in late 1985. However, he was in the United States at the time of his daughter's disappearance. He previously made comments that he would get the children. He was located in California and was ruled out as a suspect in Jessica's disappearance. When investigators searched the home where Jessica was taken from, they found a single fingerprint on the window that was used to enter the house. The print was on the outside of the window, indicating it belonged to Jessica's abductor. The print was described as being fresh and not weathered. It was sent to be tested by the FBI, but no matches were made at the time. Deborah believes a family acquaintance was the one who took her daughter that night. The acquaintance was a man who was 27 years old in 1986. He lived in West Columbia at the time of Jessica's abduction. Several weeks after she disappeared, the man stole a van from Lexington County and drove to North Carolina. There, he broke into the home of a woman and raped her as she slept. The man was arrested and convicted for the crime. He was sent to serve prison for the rape. While in prison, the man confessed to a fellow inmate that he kidnapped a girl from Lexington County, South Carolina. He claimed that he was wearing a tall cowboy hat when he took the child. He also stated he killed the girl and buried her in a landfill. The inmate went to authorities with his confession and sent a letter to Deborah about the man's confession. Investigators allegedly questioned the suspect, and he offered to tell them everything in exchange for immunity. His request for immunity was denied, and he refused to speak on the subject. Authorities searched a landfill near Jessica's house, but no remains were found. The man's fingerprint did match the one found on the window that Jessica's abductor used to get inside of the home. Deborah was able to locate a vehicle that belonged to the family friend, and it was abandoned when she found it. She located fibers inside of the car that she stated were linked to Jessica. He was not charged with Jessica's kidnapping or murder, as the solicitor's office refused to go forward with charges. They felt that there was not enough evidence to pursue charges and gain a conviction in the case. He was released from prison in 1997 and has been free and out ever since then. He is a convicted sex offender. Deborah continues to believe her ex-boyfriend had something to do with her abduction. Him and the family acquaintance denied ever meeting with each other. However, Deborah remembers them meeting and talking at a gathering held at a Waffle House weeks before Jessica's abduction. Deborah has criticized the investigation into her daughter's abduction since 1986. She has stated there was a lack of action by police when her daughter was first reported as missing. Sheriff James Metz was one of the lead investigators on the abduction case. He and Deborah had a heated phone conversation just 2 days after Jessica's disappearance. Deborah had called the sheriff because she feared investigators had been pulled off Jessica's case for the day. The call consisted of Deborah and Metz arguing about the case, and it got to a point where Metz said he would take all the men off the case and go home. Deborah had the transcripts of the call and the recording released to the public in 2007. Metz questioned why she recorded the call, but it wasn't Deborah who recorded the call. The police wiretapped the phone in Jessica's home in case someone with ransom demands called. No one did call big. The wiretap did record the heated phone call between Metz and Deborah. She said she released the call over 2 decades later because it was a big part of the case. Deborah also said she feared what Metz would do if she released the phone call earlier on. She didn't want him to remove any investigators off of Jessica's case. Metz battled the claims and said he couldn't take any investigators off of the case and that he actually added more to the case. Deborah has also accused authorities of mishandling the evidence recovered in Jessica's case and has called the officials of Lexington County corrupt. She believes they are either simply holding back on making an arrest in the case or are too scared to do it. Metz was later arrested in June of 2014 on charges for taking bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He allegedly helped illegal immigrants avoid detection at Lexington County Jail. He was convicted of all charges brought against him and was sentenced to 1 year and a day in prison. He was ordered to pay a fine and was given 2 years probation. He was released from jail in April of 2016. The solicitor who denied the charges should be filed in Jessica's case was a man named Donald Myers. He was the 11th Judicial Circuit solicitor previously. He has been arrested multiple times for DUI and other alcohol-related offenses while driving. He at one point threatened a South Carolina victims' rights director who was helping Deborah. He called the director, Sherry Carney, and said, "You get that woman off my ass, or I'll take you for everything you own. She is a squeaky wheel, demanding oiling, and she'll get no greasing from Lexington County." Deborah wonders why the solicitor is so persistent to not press charges against a family friend in Jessica's case. He tried 2 murder cases without a body after he denied charges in Jessica's case. As mentioned previously, a lot of evidence in Jessica's case was badly mishandled. This was due to failure to follow the chain of command which involves protecting evidence. The evidence was supposed to be stored in an environmentally controlled area, but while Metz was adding additions to the sheriff's office, Jessica's files were put in a tin shutout behind the office. Deborah continues to fight for answers in Jessica's case. She believes her daughter's is likely deceased, but she has hope Jessica might still be alive. Jessica's abduction remains unsolved, and her whereabouts remain a mystery. She was the first missing child in South Carolina to have her photograph age progressed by new computer technology in 1991. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Lexington County Sheriff's Office 803-359-8230.
Number 6.
12-year-old Jared Michael Negrete born September 11, 1978, was a Boy Scout who was on his first overnight backpacking trip. He was last seen on Friday, July 19, 1991, at about 6 p.m. when he fell behind his fellow scouts on a hike to the summit of 11,500-foot Mount San Gorgonio in San Bernardino National Forest, Southern California. An extensive search turned up only some candy wrappers and a camera with a haunting image of Jared on it. 30 years later, despite the large search and follow-up hikes into the area by amateur investigators, no remains have been found. Many are asking why would a scout leader leave Jared alone on his first trip whilst he and the other scouts completed their hike. Where is San Gorgonio Mountain? San Gorgonio Mountain, also known locally as Mount San Gorgonio or Old Grayback, is the highest peak in Southern California, and the transverse ranges at 11,503 feet, 3,506 meters. It is in the San Bernardino Mountains, 27 miles, 43 kilometers, east of the city of San Bernardino. It lies within the San Gorgonio Wilderness, part of the Sand to Snow National Monument managed by the San Bernardino National Forest. Jared Negrete, 12, was an 8th grader with a Hispanic background who lived in El Monte, in Los Angeles County, California. He had black hair, had brown eyes, was 5 feet 2 inches tall and 150 pounds at the time. He was wearing a tan-colored t-shirt which may have been Boy Scout style, green Boy Scout pants, and a pair of black high-top pro-wing sneakers. He had a small birthmark on his right cheek and wore glasses with brown plastic rims. He was carrying a 2-quart canteen of water. On Friday, July 19, 1991, Jared was on a trip with his scout troop to an area close to the summit of San Gorgonio Mountain in the San Bernardino National Forest, Southern California. In total, the group included a leader and 6 scouts. At around 6 p.m., Jared fell behind his fellow scouts on the hike to the summit. Another group of hikers spotted Jared straggling behind and notified the scout troop leader at the summit. They said he was seen short-cutting the switchbacks on his way down the trail and was told not to and to stay on the trail. A switchback is a trail up a steep hill or mountain that is like a zigzag pattern instead of a straight trail. Short-cutting a switchback is bad trail etiquette because it kills vegetation and loosens soil, creating a new trail straight up and down the hill, which will in time get large and hollowed out from erosion. However, the scout leader, an experienced hiker, said he would pick up Jared on the way down. When the leader finally was able to descend the mountain to pick up Jared, he was nowhere to be seen. As soon as the troop leader realized that Jared had disappeared, he accompanied his 5 other scouts back to the base camp and then hiked about 5 miles in the dark to get help. San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies, along with search and rescue teams from as far away as the Sierra Madre and San Dimas, began searching a 130-square-mile area of the San Gorgonio Wilderness, a rocky, tree-lined terrain. Within 3 days their search was focused on a 6-square-mile area, where a footprint believed to match one of Jared's high-top tennis shoes was found. Searchers also discovered beef jerky and candy wrappers believed to have been dropped by the scout, and most importantly his camera was located. On the film roll were 12 pictures. Most of the photos were landscape scenes apparently taken before Jared went missing. But the final picture on the roll of film was a photograph of the scout's eyes and nose, taken with the aid of the camera's flash, possibly at night, after he disappeared. Family members said it appeared Jared pointed his camera at his face and snapped the picture. It seemed possible that the boy had lost the camera while sliding down a portion of the mountainside. At least 70 officers, some of whom were airlifted by helicopter into the forest, and horseback riders as well as helicopters with infrared were deployed. Over the next 2 weeks, as many as 3,000 people had logged 45,000 hours scouring 50 square miles of the San Bernardino National Forest from Angeles Oaks to Whitewater Canyon. A blue water bottle was found, but this was confirmed not to be Jared's and had probably been washed down the mountain by flash flooding during the search. The temperatures were warm enough for Jared to survive unaided on the mountains for a few days, and there was a sufficient amount of water located in the area as well as the bottle he was carrying. It seemed he did have a limited amount of snacks with him. No further clues were found. Jared had vanished. Despite the discovery of the camera and its pictures, Jared remains missing 3 decades on, as of 2021. What happened to Jared Negrete? What happened on that day in July 1991? It is somewhat alarming that Jared, who was only 12 years ago, was left behind by the scout leader. Generally, the slowest hikers are put in the middle of the group to avoid anyone being left behind. Leaving a scout on his first trip away to wait for the others to finish their hike would nowadays be considered risky or even negligent. Did he fall off the trail and slip down the mountainside? He was seen short-cutting the switchbacks on his way down the trail. But after the extensive search, why wasn't anything found? Was Jared covered by the heavy vegetation and difficult terrain in the area? There are many sheer rock walls along the trails in that area that terminate into manzanita fields that are impenetrable, as well as steep drop-offs. He probably got tired of waiting for other scouts to return, so he decided to walk down the mountain trail alone. It seems possible that Jared slipped and was severely injured or died from his injuries. If he went off the main trail, it is more possible that he got lost and died. Was he abducted or murdered? There is no evidence foul play was involved, but the trail on the mountain is well used, so it's possible a predator saw Jared alone and took advantage. However, is it really possible that a pedophile could have attacked without attracting the attention of the other hikers in the area? Did he succumb to a black bear or other wildlife? It is possible for black bears to attack humans, but rare, and there are cougars in the area. There were no signs of blood, drag marks, or other evidence linked to an animal attack. Rick Mashak, a SAR member formerly with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Desert Rescue Squad, who spent over a week searching for Jared in 1991, posted on Strangeoutdoors that I was on that search for a couple of weeks. He was seen by another hiker cutting switchbacks on his way down the trail and was told not to and to stay on the trail. If you are tired, it can be tempting to some people to cut the switchbacks, and apparently that is what he continued to do until there were no more as he descended, now below the trail, and headed into a canyon where his camera was found. Below that was a stream and cliffs and some waterfalls, making it difficult to navigate. That, combined with heavy brush, at times I crawled under the brush to get through, made it extremely difficult for searching. I was sorry after all the effort of many that he was never found. An interview with Rick featured in the March Locations Unknown podcast episode 37 has further interesting insights from Rick and the search for Jared.